So Saccharomyces cerevisiae, or bread yeast, is emerging as an opportunistic pathogen. Now, the people who I believe are susceptible to suffering from an infection, of Saccharomyces cerevisiae, are people who are experiencing digestive problems, so people with a leaky gut. Now, I believe lactose intolerance is actually a symptom of a yeast infection. So people who are already suffering from lactose intolerance may actually be suffering from a yeast infection, possibly of Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So people who are around this yeast all the time, like bakers and brewers, and people who eat bread and other products that are made through the fermentation process with yeast on a regular basis. So again, people with leaky gut, lactose intolerance, bakers, brewers, people who are around this yeast on a regular basis, in my opinion, are more likely to suffer a disease or an infection from this type of yeast. Now, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, or SC, is a common ancestor of Candida albicans. And Candida albicans is already a well-known opportunistic pathogen. So again, Saccharomyces cerevisiae is a common ancestor. And both Candida and Saccharomyces cerevisiae both express dimorphic properties, meaning that they can both exist as a mold or as a yeast. Now, why I say that lactose intolerance could be a symptom of a yeast infection is because yeast release antibacterial chemicals naturally into their environment, which have the potential to kill beneficial or naturally occurring bacteria, bacteria that are naturally occurring in our intestinal tract. So again, yeast release antibacterial chemicals as a natural byproduct. Now, yeast cannot break down lactose. Bacteria can break down lactose. So again, if you are lactose intolerant, that could mean that you do not have enough beneficial bacteria because there's too much yeast in your intestinal tract. That's why I suspect that lactose intolerance is a symptom of a yeast infection. Okay, so S. boulardii, Saccharomyces boulardii, is a probiotic given to patients suffering from Clostridium, a Clostridium infection, which is a type of bacteria, I believe. Now, there's an incident where a patient in a hospital was given S. boulardii as a probiotic to deal with this Clostridium infection. And as a result, she developed a yeast infection. Not only that, all the patients in the hospital near her also suffered an infection from S. boulardii. Now, other researchers analyzed the genetic makeup of Saccharomyces boulardii, and they found it to be identical to Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So this is further evidence that Saccharomyces cerevisiae has the potential to cause yeast infections. Now, just a footnote, when you get yeast or in the blood, it is called Fungemia, and that is one of the more dangerous forms of a yeast infection once the yeast enters the blood system, and it's called Fungemia. I just put it up there because I found it. I thought it'd be interesting to share. Okay, so anyways, Saccharomyces infections tend to be the same as Candida. Now, another issue that I believe is a problem here is that if a patient or a person goes to a doctor and they are expressing symptoms of a yeast infection, they may be given antibiotics. Now, antibiotics are designed to kill the bacteria in our digestive system, and it's probiotics and other naturally occurring bacteria in the intestinal tract that help keep yeast populations down. So if you have a yeast infection that has a lot of symptoms of a bacterial infection and you go to your doctor and they give you an antibiotic, you could actually be raising the yeast population by killing off the bacteria that are preventing yeast overgrowth. So it would exacerbate the condition of the infection. So it's good to take a moment and determine whether or not you're suffering from a yeast infection before taking antibiotics. Okay, so the same recovery protocol for Candida can also apply to Saccharomyces Cerevisiae, which I'm not going to go into here. But my recommendations, if you feel like you're dealing with symptoms that are associated with a yeast infection and you are eating Saccharomyces Cerevisiae on a regular basis in your breads, drinking beers, I would just stop that for about 2 weeks. Stop eating any products with yeast in them for about 2 weeks. And then after that, slowly start adding healthy bacteria, either as a supplement, fermented foods, yogurts, cheeses. And also I would consider working on repairing any intestinal issues you have. Now, mucus is something that the epithelial cells secrete in the intestinal lining, and it's the mucus that helps keep the cells healthy and lubricated. Now, we need vitamin A to make mucus. If we are not getting enough vitamin A in our diet, instead of these epithelial cells making mucus, they start making keratin, which can really cause problems for your digestive tract. Also, mucus is a glycoprotein. There's up to 60% carbohydrates in these carbohydrate protein glycoproteins. So you want to make sure you're getting enough complex carbohydrates and that you're breaking them down correctly, as well as protein. You want to be making sure you're eating enough protein and that your body is breaking it down and using it. So those are the only two things that I would recommend here about repairing your gut: enough vitamin A and making sure you're getting enough complex carbohydrates and proteins and that you're breaking them down efficiently. Now, in closing, Saccharomyces cerevisiae has a lot of probiotic properties, and there's been a lot of evidence that it is actually good for us in certain levels. It is developing the concern comes where it's becoming more of a secondary infection. If you are already immunocompromised, it is more likely to cause a state of infection, much the same way that Candida does, but it's not as virulent as Candida. So my closing opinion is, I don't think there's any problem to stop eating bread or drinking beer altogether, but I would be cautious and cognizant of any symptoms of a yeast infection and just monitor how much yeast you're taking in on a regular basis.